Brother tricked me into co-signing a loan for his new startup, then abandoned the project, leaving debt collectors at my door, forcing me to hunt for proof that he lied or face a financial disaster that could ruin every plan I remember the first night the calls came, and it still hits me in a way I cannot shake, because I was sitting in my tiny apartment in Clearwater, alone after a long shift, thinking the worst thing in my life at 27 would be figuring out how to pay rent on time, not dealing with a debt that had my name printed across it like a trap I never saw coming, a trap set by my own brother. And even now I can feel that same tight pressure in my chest every time I think about it, because it was the kind of moment that changes how you see someone you grew up with, someone you used to chase around the backyard when we lived with our dad in that old duplex near Riverview Park, long before any of this. And I guess I should start with who I am, since it makes the rest make a little more sense. I am Raphael, 27, working as a line cook at a small diner that stays open way too late for its own good, and trying to save up money so I can finally move out of Florida one day and start something new for myself, maybe in Oregon or Colorado. I do not know yet, but anything that feels different from the same streets and the same humid nights I have known my entire life. And my brother is Marco, 34, the kind of guy who always talked big, always dreamed big, always had plans that somehow never lasted more than 3 months. And I told myself that this time was different when he came to me talking about a tech startup he wanted to build with some guy named Lennox, a quiet man in his late 40s who barely spoke but smiled every time Marco bragged about the idea. Something about personalized data tools for small businesses. I did not understand the details, and honestly I did not care to, because I am not a business person, I am not a numbers person, I am not the guy who reads contracts or looks at charts. I cook, I clean, I go home smelling like garlic, and that is my life. But Marco knew I wanted more one day, and he used that. He sat with me in our dad's backyard and talked about how this could be my chance to get out, how I could be part of something, how he believed in me. And you have to understand something about us. We never had a stable family. Our dad worked overnight shifts at a warehouse. Our mom left when I was 9 and Marco was 16. So he was the one who walked me to school. He was the one who defended me when the older kids messed with me. He was the one who taught me how to ride a bike and how to shave and how to pretend. Everything was fine even when the lights got cut off for the 3rd time in a year. So when he looked at me with those eyes that always made me feel like I owed him something for keeping me afloat when we were young, I felt that old pull, that old guilt, that old loyalty that comes from surviving childhood with someone who was broken in the same shape you were. And I said yes to co-signing the loan. I said yes even though I felt weird about it. I said yes even though the loan officer looked at me longer than he looked at Marco, like he already knew I was the one who would get screwed if this went wrong. I said yes because I trusted my brother, and for a small moment I even felt proud of him, like maybe he finally found something that would stick. But within 6 weeks Lennox disappeared from the project, then Marco stopped answering my calls except late at night when he swore he just needed more time. Then the company website went offline, then the bank emailed me, then the collectors called, and I remember sitting there with my phone vibrating on the table, staring at a name I did not recognize, and something inside me sank in a way that felt permanent, like a stone falling deep into water, because I knew this was not an accident. I knew he had walked away, and all the childhood memories I had held onto about him did not matter in that moment. They did not erase the fact that someone I loved used me as a shield to protect himself, and I felt stupid, so stupid that I did not even tell my dad at first, because my dad is 61 now and tired and still working nights, and I did not want him to look at me and see a boy who never learned how to stop being fooled. And I spent 3 days calling Marco, texting him, begging him to at least explain himself, and I got nothing, not one word, not one apology, just silence. And after a while the silence felt like its own answer, so I started digging for anything I could find, any proof that he lied, any message, any document, anything that could show the collectors this was fraud, not negligence. And as I searched through old emails and messages I kept thinking about who I used to believe he was, and who he really turned out to be, and how sometimes the people who grew up with you know exactly which parts of your heart have no armor, and they know where to cut, and it hurts in a way that feels personal even when it looks like money on paper, because it was never about the loan, not for me. It was about realizing the person I trusted most was willing to walk me straight into a disaster to save himself. And I remember sitting on my bedroom floor with my laptop open, scrolling through every file I had, every text we ever exchanged. Feeling like every memory was cracking a little, and I knew that if I did not find something soon, something that proved he misled me, my credit would be destroyed, my savings gone, and every plan I had for my life would collapse like everything else Marco ever built. And I kept telling myself he would call, he would show up, he would fix this, he would explain. But the more the hours passed, the more I realized I was on my own. And that realization sat heavy, like a weight I could not lift, and part of me hated him, part of me missed him, part of me wished I never answered his call that afternoon in our dad's backyard. But mostly I just felt lost, because how do you clear your name when the person who ruined it shares your blood and will not even look you in the eye? And that was the moment I knew I had to go find him, not for revenge, not for anger, but because if I did not force the truth out of him, my future would not survive the wreck he left behind. I drove across Clearwater the next morning with a feeling I could not shake, something tense and wired that sat in the back of my neck, because I knew I had reached the point where waiting for answers would only drag me deeper into the mess Marco created. So I decided to go look for him myself, even if it meant hearing things I did not want to hear. And as I sat in my beat-up car that smelled like fry oil from too many late nights at the diner, I kept replaying his old promises in my head. Promises he made when we were younger, like when I was 15 and he was 22, and he told me he would never let anything bad happen to me again after he pulled me out of a fight in the school parking lot. But those memories felt like they belonged to a different version of him, someone who used to care, someone who used to try, and I kept wondering when that version disappeared. When he became someone who could smile at me while convincing me to put my name on a loan he knew he would abandon. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got at myself, because there were signs long before this, like how he quit 3 different jobs in 1 year, how he always had a new idea for a business that never went anywhere, how he borrowed money from friends and avoided them until they stopped asking for it back. And I kept telling myself that he would not do that to me, that I was different, that I was important to him. And that lie hit harder than the debt, because it made me confront something I did not want to believe about blood and loyalty, and how sometimes the person who helped raise you grows into someone who takes advantage of every soft place you have. And when I reached Lennox's old office building, a small place near Palm Harbor with faded letters peeling off the windows, I parked and walked up to the door, hoping I would find some kind of clue, but the place was empty, cleaned out to the last screw. And a neighbor in the next office told me that they had moved out 2 months ago, right after the website went offline. And that made my stomach drop, because I realized Marco had been lying longer than I thought. And when I asked the neighbor if he ever saw my brother, he said he saw him leave late one night with boxes, but that was it. And I thanked him, even though the answer made me feel worse, because it meant Marco had time to warn me, time to tell me the truth, time to back up before dragging me down with him. But he did none of that, and I drove away feeling more lost than before. So I tried going to the place Marco had been staying with his girlfriend, a woman named Alicia who was 31 and worked at a small clothing shop in Dunedin, someone I met twice but never liked because she carried the same restless energy Marco did, the kind of person who always talked about plans but never finished anything. And I could not blame her for what Marco did, but I hoped she would at least know where he had gone. And when I reached her apartment complex, I sat in the car for a full minute trying to calm myself, because I did not want to show up angry and make things worse. But as soon as she opened the door and saw me, she shook her head like she already knew why I was there. And she told me Marco left a week ago after an argument and had not come back since. And the way she said it made my chest feel tight, because it meant he had walked out on her too. And maybe she was just another person he used until she had nothing left to give. And I asked if he said where he was going, and she said he mentioned something about needing space and that he was thinking about going to stay with an old friend named Brant who lived in Brooksville, someone I barely remembered from when I was a kid, a tall guy with a shaved head who used to fix cars behind his house and let us hang around even though we were too young to be anywhere near engines and tools. And hearing that name pulled up a memory of sitting on an overturned bucket behind Brant's garage eating popsicles that melted faster than we could finish them, and for a moment that memory made everything feel heavier, because it meant Marco went to someone who knew us when life was simpler, before all of this, before the debts and the lies and the calls that kept coming every night. And I thanked Alicia, even though she looked exhausted and fed up and maybe even relieved to be done with Marco. And as I drove out toward Brooksville, the sun was going down, and the sky turned the kind of orange that makes everything look softer than it feels. And I kept thinking about what I would say if I actually found him, if I would yell or break down or just stand there waiting for him to finally tell the truth, because a part of me still hoped this was a misunderstanding even though I knew it was not. And the deeper I went into the drive, the more I realized that confronting him was not only about the money. It was about knowing if the brother I loved still existed somewhere under all the mistakes he kept stacking like cards ready to fall. Because I needed to know if I mattered to him at all. Or if I had just been convenient. And by the time I reached the old road that led to Brant's place, I felt something settle in me, something steady and quiet, because I knew I was close to getting answers even if they hurt. And I promised myself that whatever came next I would not let him decide my future again, not after everything he had already taken from me without hesitation. I pulled into Brant's driveway feeling a mix of hope and dread twisting in my stomach because I could see his house through the trees, the same one from my childhood, only older and more worn. And the sight of it brought back memories I had not touched in years, like how Marco used to bring me here on weekends when Dad needed to pick up extra shifts. And how Brant would let us sit on the steps while he worked on cars and joked with Marco in a way that made me feel like they understood each other in a world I was not old enough to enter yet. And as I walked up the gravel path I kept thinking about all the nights Dad came home exhausted but still pushed himself to make us dinner, and how Marco stepped into a role he never asked for at 16, doing his best even when he hated the weight of it. And part of me wondered if that was why he turned into the kind of man who broke things before they could break him. But that thought did not soften anything, it only made everything feel sadder. And when I reached the front door I knocked hard enough that my knuckles stung because I knew if I hesitated I might lose my nerve. And when Brant opened the door I saw the years written on his face, deep lines around his eyes and a careful way of holding himself like he was carrying something heavy. And for a second he just stared at me before his expression changed, and he said my name, slow and surprised, and he stepped aside to let me in. And walking into that house felt like stepping into an old photograph. Everything the same except for the layer of tiredness hanging in the air. And I asked him if Marco was staying there and his shoulders tensed before he nodded, telling me Marco had shown up nearly a week ago saying he needed a place to crash, saying he needed to get away, saying everything was fine even though it clearly was not. And I felt my chest tighten because hearing that made everything too real. And Brant led me to the small room near the back of the house where Marco used to sleep when we visited as kids. And he told me Marco had gone out that morning and had not come back yet, and he asked me what was going on, and I explained everything in a voice that shook more than I wanted it to, talking about the loan, the startup, the collectors, the lies, and as the words came out I felt the anger rising again because saying it out loud made it feel bigger, sharper. And Brant listened quietly with his arms crossed, and when I finished he shook his head, saying he had known Marco was hiding something but did not know it was this serious. And he told me something I did not expect, that Marco had come in a few nights ago drunk and crying, saying he messed up, saying he did not know how to fix what he had done, saying he wished he could disappear. And hearing that hit me harder than I wanted it to, because as angry as I was I could still picture the kid he used to be. The one who held onto my hand when we crossed the street, the one who tried so hard to be more than the childhood he got stuck with. And before I could say anything we heard the sound of a car door outside. And Brant looked at me with a quiet warning before we stepped out of the hallway. And when I saw Marco walking up the steps I felt something cold settle in my chest, not anger, not fear, but something heavier, like disappointment mixed with grief. And he froze when he saw me, his eyes wide, his face tired. And he whispered my name like he was afraid to say it too loud, and for a moment neither of us moved, neither of us spoke, because we both knew why I was there. And I waited for him to say something, anything. But he just stood there running a hand through his hair like he wanted to pull the guilt out of his skin. And when he finally spoke his voice cracked, telling me he was sorry, telling me he meant to fix it, telling me he did not think it would get this bad. And those words made something inside me snap because I had heard versions of that apology so many times, and I told him he needed to give me every detail, every document, every message, everything he had hidden. Because the collectors were coming after me and my life was falling apart because he walked away without warning, and he started pacing like he always did when he panicked, talking fast about how Lennox bailed on him, how the money disappeared, how he thought he could buy time, how he thought no one would come after me so quickly, and I told him to stop making excuses and to tell me the truth, the real truth, and he finally sat down on the worn couch looking smaller than I had ever seen him. Saying he knew from the start the business would not last, saying he knew the loan was a risk he could not cover, saying he used my name because he thought I was the only person who would not turn away from him. And hearing that felt like someone pressing a thumb into a bruise I had been pretending did not hurt, because he was right. I would not have turned away. And he knew that, and he used it. And I felt something inside me break in a way I did not know how to piece back together. And I told him I needed proof of his lies so I could protect myself. And he nodded slowly like he knew this moment would come, and he reached into his bag and pulled out a folder filled with emails and documents I had never seen. And he said he kept them in case things got worse. And part of me wanted to scream at him for waiting this long. But another part of me was just relieved because it meant I finally had something to fight with. Something to show the collectors. Something to prove I was not responsible for a mess I never created. And when I took the folder from his hands, I felt the weight of all the years between us pressing down, not just the bad ones but the good ones too, and it hurt in a way I did not have words for, because love and betrayal can sit in the same place inside you, and sometimes you do not know which one is stronger until you are forced to choose. I sat at Brant's old table with the folder open in front of me while Marco paced in the small living room like he could not stay still, and I felt something strange settle over me, something calm. Because once I started reading the emails and text exchanges, I understood how deep he had fallen long before he ever dragged me into it, and the messages between him and Lennox showed promises that never became real. Dates that kept getting pushed, investments that never came through, and every line looked like proof of a slow collapse he tried to hide with louder confidence and bigger plans. And as I read, I felt the anger leaking out of me, replaced with something more complicated because the truth was worse than what I imagined, not because he lied, but because he had been drowning long before I saw the water rising, and when I looked up at him I saw someone tired. Not just physically but in a way that makes a person look older than they should at 34, and he kept asking if the documents would help, if I could fix it, if I could get free from the collectors. And I told him yes, even though I was not completely sure, because the emails showed he made choices behind my back, and the signed notes proved he acted on his own, and it was enough to show the collectors I had not been part of the mistakes. And the relief that hit him when I said that made him sit down like his legs could not hold him anymore. And he buried his face in his hands, telling me he never wanted to hurt me, telling me he panicked, telling me he thought he could clean it up before anyone noticed, and hearing that pulled something inside me in two directions because part of me still loved him, and part of me wanted to walk out and never look back, and for a while either of us spoke. And the house felt quiet in a way that reminded me of late nights when we were kids listening to Dad come home from work. And I kept thinking about how life changes people without warning, how the same person who once held your hand crossing the street can become the person who hands you a debt large enough to break your future. And I knew I would carry that truth for a long time, maybe forever. And after a while Marco stood up and said he would call the collectors himself, that he would try to explain everything, that he would take responsibility. And I wanted to believe him, I really did. But I also knew he was someone who struggled to finish anything he started, so I told him I would handle the calls because I could not trust him to stay long enough to see it through, and he nodded like he understood, and maybe he did, because he looked defeated in a way I had never seen. And when I gathered the folder and walked toward the door, he followed me outside, stopping at the steps like he was afraid to come closer, and he told me he wanted to fix things between us someday, and that he hoped I would not hate him forever. And I told him I did not hate him. That the truth was worse in a different way because I still cared, and caring for someone who hurts you feels like carrying something sharp in your pocket, always cutting you even when you forget it is there. And he nodded with this sad kind of acceptance, and I walked to my car feeling heavier than when I arrived because I knew this was not the kind of story that ended clean. It was the kind that left bruises you feel for years even after you heal. And on the drive back to Clearwater the roads felt longer than before, and the sky looked pale with the early morning light coming in, and I kept thinking about how I would explain everything to the collectors and what documents to show first, and I thought about the life I nearly lost because of a signature I gave without thinking, and what it meant to trust someone only because they share your blood. And by the time I reached my apartment I felt older in a way that did not match my 27 years, and when I walked in and sat on the couch with the folder on my lap I felt something close inside me, not anger, not peace, something in between, something like acceptance that things would never go back to the way they were. And later that day I sent the documents to the collectors, explaining everything piece by piece in simple words. And when they wrote back saying they would pause action while reviewing the proof I felt a wave of relief so strong I had to sit down, and breathed slowly until the shaking in my hands stopped. And I realized I had been living with fear for so long that the absence of it felt strange, like stepping off a boat and remembering the ground is solid. And in the days that followed, I answered every call, sent every file, pushed for every update, and little by little the truth began to work in my favor, and the collectors shifted their focus from me to the people who actually made the decisions. And I could finally see a future not crushed under debt someone else created. And when I thought about Marco, I felt something softer than anger, but not quite forgiveness, something that told me we were not done, that our story was not finished, but for now distance was the only thing that made sense. And maybe one day we would talk again, maybe one day he would try to rebuild the bridge he'd burned without thinking. But until then I needed to protect myself, because I learned the hard way that love does not fix everything. And loyalty can ruin you if you hand it out without limits. And as I sat in my small apartment with the windows open and the sound of cars drifting in from the street, I felt something steady for the first time in months, something like control. And I promised myself I would never let anyone put me in a situation like this again. Not even the person who taught me what family meant when I was too young to understand the word.